The ancient Romans had a deep passion for wine. They celebrated it in poems, sang about it in songs, painted it on their walls, and poured it generously at every gathering. Wine was woven into daily life, and it shaped how people came together, relaxed, and shared stories. At the center of this culture was the taberna, a Roman tavern where food, drink, and conversation filled the air. These spaces were always alive with energy. The sound of laughter, the clatter of dice, the scent of cooked meals, and the steady rhythm of poured wine created a setting that felt familiar to everyone who walked through the door. One discovery in southern France has brought this world into focus. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of a 2,100-year-old Roman tavern, showing how these places existed not just in Rome, but across the lands the empire touched. Taverns carried Roman customs, language, and ideas into every corner they reached, offering a taste of Roman life to anyone who entered. So, what did a Roman tavern really look and feel like? What happened during the daylight hours when the streets outside were full? And how did things change when night arrived and the city settled into its darker rhythm? Life in ancient Rome followed a rhythm shaped by the sun. As dawn broke, the streets began to fill. Workers headed to their jobs, shops opened their doors, and the noise of the city slowly picked up. Most people finished their tasks before sunset, since there wasn't enough light to keep going once darkness came. Without streetlights or lamps to guide them, many preferred to stay indoors after nightfall, but for those who stepped outside, one place always stayed open: the tavern. Taverns became a natural stop once the day ended. With few homes equipped with proper kitchens, these spots offered not just food and drink, but a sense of comfort and routine. People came for a quick meal, usually bread, cheese, olives, or chickpeas, and washed it down with wine. Inside, the air was warm, filled with chatter, and lit by flickering oil lamps. Games were played, stories were shared, and the stress of the day faded into the hum of voices and the clink of clay cups. While ordinary citizens gathered in these neighborhood taverns, enjoying the familiar faces and simple pleasures, the wealthy experienced their nights differently. Their evenings unfolded in grand halls and courtyards, surrounded by fine dishes, rare wines, and carefully arranged entertainment. Banquets were a major part of elite Roman life. Feasts with several courses, music, poetry, and performances that stretched late into the night. The setting was polished, but the purpose was the same: to enjoy the night. Sometimes, though, even the rich sought something different. Some would leave their grand homes behind for an evening and wander into the less polished parts of the city. In these lively neighborhoods, they mixed with the crowds at local taverns, looking for a new kind of thrill. Whether it was rolling dice at a smoky corner table or slipping into a quieter backroom for conversation, these moments added a spark of unpredictability to lives that were otherwise carefully controlled. Every corner of the city came alive in its own way once the sun went down. But beyond the laughter and conversation echoing from taverns and homes, the streets told a different story, one that made many think twice before stepping outside. As night deepened, the roads of ancient Rome became risky. With no streetlights to guide the way, shadows stretched across narrow alleys, offering the perfect cover for thieves and troublemakers. Walking alone could mean running into danger. Fights, robberies, and even worse weren't unusual once darkness took hold. This is why most people stayed close to familiar places, avoiding long walks or quiet paths after dusk. For those who still needed to eat or meet with friends, the safest option was often the local taberna. These small eateries were built into the daily rhythm of Roman life, especially for people living in tight, crowded housing without kitchens. Grabbing a meal from a nearby food shop wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Inside these bustling spots, the smell of roasted chickpeas, warm bread, and cheap wine filled the air. Some customers stopped in to take food home, but many stayed. The tables were worn, the rooms packed, and the mood lively. People ate, drank, gambled, and argued, all within the same space. Every corner buzzed with voices, and the atmosphere rarely quieted down. This energy could be felt even more in cities like Pompeii, where taverns were woven into everyday life. For many, cooking at home wasn't an option, so these places became the go-to for regular meals. Simple dishes like cheese, sausages, or bread were always on hand, and there were spots to sit for those who wanted to linger. Taverns weren't just convenient, they were essential to how people lived. The longer people stayed, the more the space transformed into something beyond a dining area. Games of dice were played on tabletops, coins clinked, and loud cheers or groans followed every win or loss. Pompeian art even captures scenes of these moments, people huddled around games, caught in the thrill. Not every round ended peacefully, though. Tempers sometimes flared, turning playful games into heated arguments. Frescoes show scuffles breaking out, with tavern owners stepping in to keep things under control. Amid it all, the waitresses moved quickly, balancing plates and pitchers while dodging raised voices and spilled drinks. They kept the rhythm of the room steady, even as the chaos grew around them. But while these taverns were lively centers of everyday life for many, not everyone saw them in a positive light. The Roman upper class often looked down on these places. Writers like Juvenal and Ammianus Marcellinus described taverns as gathering spots for criminals, runaways, and other people they considered lowly. Some emperors saw them as places where trouble could start and tried to control what could be served there. Even with these opinions and occasional restrictions, taverns remained popular among the common people, especially at night, when most other places were closed and quiet. The empire took notice of how important nightlife had become for the average Roman. After sunset, with the streets poorly lit and often unsafe, people stayed close to their neighborhoods. Local bars known as tabernae became evening refuges. Since many Romans lived in small apartments without kitchens, these nearby eateries weren't just convenient, they were necessary. In Pompeii, records suggest there was at least one tavern for every 100 people, and the same was likely true in the capital city. While the general population gathered in local taverns, the wealthy experienced the night in an entirely different way. Their evenings unfolded in private homes and luxurious villas. These places weren't just for living, they were stages for grand events. Wealthy hosts arranged elaborate gatherings that stretched deep into the night, filled with music, food, and entertainment. Some even created their own arenas for chariot races or wild animal displays, turning their homes into personal playgrounds. A few of the most extravagant examples come from Rome's own rulers. Emperor Tiberius once hosted a drinking party that lasted 2 full days without pause. Emperor Nero took things even further, organizing full-blown chariot races inside his palace grounds for the amusement of his guests. And then there was Lucius Verus, who spent a staggering 6 million sesterces on a dinner for just 12 people, making sure every bite and every moment screamed luxury. For the elite, the night wasn't just a time to relax, it was a performance. Every evening was a stage where wealth, power, and appetite were put proudly on display. These grand feasts weren't thrown together casually. They were carefully designed to impress, seduce, and leave lasting memories. A proper banquet could stretch across several hours and include course after course of rare and exotic foods, flamingo tongues, stuffed dormice, sea urchins, and sauces blended with crushed pearls or gold flakes. The meals were matched by entertainment just as elaborate. Poets recited crafted verses, musicians filled the halls with music, and as the night went on, performances became more daring, sometimes bordering on scandalous. Some personalities became famous simply for their over-the-top habits. Tricongius was known across Rome for drinking 3 gallons of wine in one sitting, earning cheers and disbelief in equal measure. Apicius, one of the most legendary food lovers in Roman history, blew through entire fortunes just trying to perfect one unforgettable meal. He believed that the right dish wasn't just food, it was a masterpiece. For the wealthy, these banquets were more than dinner. They were gatherings where alliances were formed, reputations were built, and social rank was reinforced. The table became a battlefield of elegance and excess, where everyone wanted to be seen, remembered, and admired. Even those who couldn't afford such displays often dreamed of them. trying to copy the style in smaller ways. These nights, dripping in wine and ambition, became the heart of elite Roman culture. But sometimes even the grandeur of gold-plated feasts wasn't enough. Some wealthy Romans craved something messier, something real. So they slipped out of their luxurious homes and wandered into the rougher parts of the city, drawn to the raw, unpredictable energy of the streets. These outings weren't about fine wine or silk cushions, they were about curiosity, excitement, and a little danger. For young nobles, sneaking into local taverns, brushing shoulders with gamblers, drunks, and workers was a thrill that couldn't be found inside marble walls. They imitated the habits of everyday people, drinking cheap wine, playing dice games, and joking with strangers who didn't care about their social rank. It was risky. Fights could break out, or reputations could be bruised. But it offered them a taste of freedom from their polished lives. In these dimly lit corners, far from banquet halls, they found a different kind of entertainment, gritty, chaotic, and entirely their own. The hunger for excitement didn't stop with nobles. Rome's emperors raised the stakes even higher. Their nights were spectacles designed to impress and overwhelm. Emperors threw parties that stretched across multiple days, overflowing with food, music, wild games, and surprises no ordinary Roman could dream of. From exotic animal hunts to bizarre contests and extravagant betting, their celebrations pushed the boundaries of what nightlife could be. With endless resources at their fingertips, there were no limits. This appetite for pleasure and performance shaped not only the culture of the empire, but also the way it's remembered today. And while much of this world has vanished, traces of it live on. Some of those pieces, coins, pottery, tools, and even sculptures have been carefully preserved and studied, giving us a clearer picture of the lives behind the stories. The artifacts that survived the Roman Empire help us imagine a world full of color, ceremony, and power. But not everything uncovered tells a story of pride. Some things point to the hidden corners of Roman life, where pleasure turned into something more disturbing. Many of those stories begin inside the city taverns. Roman taverns, or popinae, were scattered across towns and cities, especially in busy hubs like Pompeii as we talked. These places were more than spots for a drink. They were melting pots where classes mixed, often uneasily. Some were humble, small, smoky rooms with rough wooden benches and jugs of cheap wine. Others were louder, cruder, and much more chaotic. And it was in these darker corners that exploitation became part of the nightly routine. Women in these taverns were not just servers. Many were concubines, brought in to entertain wealthy guests or travelers passing through. For some, this was the only way to survive in a world where freedom and safety weren't guaranteed. Their value was tied to how well they could pour wine, flirt, sing, and obey. Often, they had little say in where they ended up each night. Many were enslaved, owned by tavern keepers, or loaned from wealthier homes. They weren't just working for tips. They were surviving the night. Drunkenness blurred lines, and violence was not uncommon. Brawls between patrons, assaults, and unwanted advances were part of the expected chaos. These women, even children at times, were vulnerable to it all. Roman law did not protect them much. The idea of consent was blurry in a system built on ownership, and what happened behind closed tavern doors stayed hidden unless it caused public outrage. Even boys were not spared. Poor families sometimes gave their children to tavern owners in exchange for debt relief or favors. These children, some barely into their teens, were put to work under brutal conditions. They cleaned up after drunks, served food in dangerous environments, and were expected to entertain when demanded. In the worst cases, they were treated as property and subjected to the whims of cruel guests. For these boys and girls, childhood ended early. Graffiti left behind on tavern walls offers chilling insights. Some inscriptions joke about beatings or brag about favors bought for the price of a drink. In the heart of Pompeii, near the more elite villas, popinae lined the streets with simple signs: a painted phallus, a carved wine jug, a crude menu. These signs told passers-by what was on offer. Behind the doors, those offers included food, drink, flesh, and silence. We often imagine Rome as an empire of philosophers and generals, of marble halls and golden laurel crowns, but the underbelly of that world was raw and ruthless. Tavern owners ran tight operations, aiming for profit over dignity. Every jug of wine sold came with a shadow of something darker, an unpaid favor, a threatened servant, a silent scream. While not all taverns were dens of exploitation, enough were to earn them a reputation. Writers of the time hinted at their danger. Juvenal, in his sharp satires, mocked how the city's elite snuck into these joints for secret thrills. He didn't need to explain what those thrills were, readers already knew. The mix of alcohol, secrecy, and desperation made these places ideal for hidden acts. There was little hope for those trapped in this cycle. The rich could drink and disappear. The poor, the enslaved, the forgotten, they remained night after night, performing, serving, surviving. And sometimes they didn't. Murders were not rare. Overdoses from spiked drinks or brutal beatings during drunken fights ended lives quickly. The law turned a blind eye unless the dead mattered to someone powerful. The archaeological evidence confirms this. Excavations in Pompeii and Herculaneum have uncovered small, dim rooms with narrow beds and chains. Remains of young bodies in servant quarters tell a quiet but powerful story. These weren't places of rest. They were places where dignity was worn away, little by little, hour by hour. Even the layout of many popinae speaks volumes. A bar in front, bedrooms in back, rooms without windows, cellars with nothing but straw mats. These spaces weren't built for luxury or comfort, they were built for transactions, quick, quiet, and forgettable. And yet, these same places helped define the empire's rhythm. Taverns were where information passed. Deals were made. Secrets were spilled. That power made them necessary even as they remained dangerous. Roman culture thrived on contrast, glory and grime, empire and ruin, gods and gutter. Taverns stood at that exact intersection. Today, when we walk through the ruins and see faded murals or broken tiles, we often admire the craftsmanship. But it's worth remembering what happened in the rooms beyond the main bar. Not all stories were noble. Some were brutal, short, and buried under layers of silence. And yet, in a way, these stories are just as Roman as the triumphs we celebrate. What's even more striking is how far these places were from the pubs and bars we know today. Modern pubs, despite their rowdiness on certain nights, are often seen as casual, communal spaces, places to unwind, laugh, catch up with friends, or enjoy live music. There are rules, security, lighting, and some sense of order. There's also a general expectation of safety, whether you're sipping wine in a quiet corner or dancing at the bar. But Roman taverns were a different world entirely. They weren't just for drinking, they were scenes of power plays, backdoor deals, and sometimes terrible violence. Many weren't regulated at all, tucked away in alleys or beneath multi-story buildings where poor ventilation and dim torchlight only added to the chaos. There were no bouncers to break up fights or laws to protect the vulnerable. Thieves, brothel owners, and corrupt guards often found common ground in these places. Children were sometimes present, not as guests, but as helpers or victims, caught in a cycle they couldn't escape. These taverns were not safe retreats. They were risky, unpredictable, and often cruel. And yet, for all their darkness, they were part of daily Roman life. The sharp divide between public glory and private grime is exactly what makes the Roman world so endlessly fascinating and disturbingly familiar in ways we may not want to admit. And yet, for all their darkness, they were part of daily Roman life. The sharp divide between public glory and private grime is exactly what makes the Roman world so endlessly fascinating and disturbingly familiar in ways we may not want to admit. Because behind the marble statues and triumphal arches, Rome pulsed with contradictions. It was a civilization of innovation and excess, beauty and brutality, where soaring ideals walked hand in hand with the rawest parts of human nature. The empire wasn't just built by emperors and soldiers, It was shaped just as much by the tavern keeper pouring cheap wine, the runaway child sweeping the floors, the concubine waiting behind a curtain, the gambler betting away his future. These people lived in the cracks of history, rarely remembered, often erased, but they were Rome too.